Ramsey Nasrallah. Today we are breaking down the NCAA's punishments delivered to Michigan. It's been a day that Ohio State fans and college football fans have waited a long time for, with this saga starting in October 2023 and running until now, August 2025. I'm going to do a quick rundown of what we know and what the NCAA has commented on and made public. Going to kick around some conversation. And as always, we encourage you to be commenting your questions and any thoughts that you might have. We'll be bouncing those around as well. We also have an opportunity for you to comment too in our forums if you wish to do that. But Dan and Ramsey, here's what we got from the NCAA today. We have, as per their release, that Michigan received 4 years of probation. They received financial penalties of a $50,000 fine plus 10% of the budget for the football program. They received a fine equivalent to the anticipated loss of postseason competition over the next 2 years, a fine equivalent of the cost of 10% of scholarships awarded to Michigan's football program, and a 25% reduction in football official visits during the 2025-26 season. Also, there is a 14-week prohibition on recruiting communications in the football program during the probation period. For Connor Stalions, an 8-year show cause order restricting him from all athletically related activities during the show cause period. For Jim Harbaugh, a 10-year show cause order restricting him from all athletically related activities, which will begin on August 7th, 2028, at the conclusion of his other 4-year show cause order from a previous case. And then we have Denard Robinson, a 3-year show cause order. And for Sherrone Moore, another big ticket item is that the NCAA accepted the self-proposed 2-game suspension for the 2025 season, but has also tacked on a suspension for Sherrone Moore, likely toward the beginning of the season in 2026. So a laundry list of items. Ramsey, I want to kick it off with you. You had 10,000 words in the Ohio State wide receiver room earlier this year. I'm pretty sure you could write a dissertation on Michigan. What were your thoughts when you saw the NCAA's punishment for Michigan come out today?
I think if you thought that Michigan was guilty of impropriety of cheating, you were right. And if you thought that the NCAA would do nothing about it, you were right. So they basically laid out the case for, in another era, bringing down punishment that, I want to go as far as SMU, just because SMU got the repeat offender and then ended up getting shut down for a year. But it's pretty clear that what they did was egregious, and they obfuscated. The president left, the coach left, they fired a low-level staffer mid-year, they fired Chris Partridge. There's a lot of stuff happened. And if you were like, oh, everyone does this, I think the first takeaway is that no, not everyone does this. This was definitely different. The second takeaway is I'm thinking about programs and universities with money. I'm thinking about Texas A&M or Ohio State. And you see this and you're like, Ohio State just spent $20 million on a roster. I'm throwing that term out because it was floated around a lot during 2024, and they got a national title out of it. Michigan's spending $20 million and basically got the same thing without having to go the NIL route. They had a bunch of 26-year-olds from the COVID year. They had everyone's signals. You know what? I'm sure they thought it's money well spent. This is exactly the kind of punishment they would want. They have unlimited resources. The only way you can hurt Michigan is by depriving them of future opportunities, which is what I think a lot of people were rooting for. That didn't happen. So it's a bit of a signal. I think we'll get into it. Like, are you disappointed in it? Like, I don't know what I was rooting for. I think the 2024 Michigan-Ohio State game kind of changed that for me because they played with half a deck in Columbus as a 3-touchdown underdog, a Make-A-Wish kid at quarterback, and they won. So it kind of tells me, like, you can't really, what if they weren't cheating? They got this unfair advantage when you're losing games like that. So prior to last November, I'd probably be like, yeah, give them the hammer. Since then, I'm like, yeah, you've got a Michigan problem at Ohio State. It has nothing to do with sign stealing. It has nothing to do with cheating. It has to do with Ohio State being its worst enemy on that game. So what I was expecting, I think validation that they clearly, the golden era, that little mini dynasty, it's where they were covering the spread as underdogs. That's like an isolated 3-year span. If you look at what they were like the previous 20 years and what they were like just last year, they had a losing record against the spread. If you're a Michigan fan and you're relieved today, you got to think like, all right, what does the future portend? What does this program look like without cheating? It looks like that, unless they, unless something else happens. They lost 5 games last year. The last 2 games are what you choose to remember because they were both really good for Michigan, but that's not a really good signal. If the best years of the past 25 are all basically a laundry list of NCAA impropriety.
Dan, what are your thoughts when Michigan receives its penalties? And Dan and I were also a part of an NCAA press conference that happened about an hour ago, started an hour ago and ended probably about 30 minutes ago. So we did have some stuff from that as well. But Dan, what were your initial reactions when you see the Michigan penalties?
Well, I do want to acknowledge we're still kind of figuring out the live streaming here thing. It's our first week of doing this. So some of you might have, I don't know if this might be showing up as the wrong title on YouTube, or you may be on another link, had to switch over to this one. We're figuring it out. We'll get there. Hopefully.
It says Chatterbait on the top of my screen. Am I on the wrong site?
You might be on the wrong site.
I don't think you want that.
My bad, guys.
But yeah, we'll figure it out. Sorry about that. If you guys went to the wrong link initially, we're working on that. But going back to the topic at hand, I thought it was interesting. I when I was called on in the press conference, I asked them about vacating wins, and they said that wasn't even considered in this case, that they will only consider that if it involves ineligible players. The chair of the Committee on Infractions, Kay Norton, followed up saying that they felt there was, quote, insufficient evidence that the scheme, that even though they found that there was absolutely an impermissible scouting scheme that was orchestrated by Connor Stallions in Michigan, there was insufficient evidence that that actually impacted the outcome of games. And so, there was not even any consideration of vacating wins here. The postseason ban was something that the NCAA said that it felt it had sufficient grounds for. It just decided not to do it because it doesn't want to punish current players, which, look, like in principle, like I agree with this shift by the NCAA, like not to punish current players for things that past teams did. But the problem is, like, if you're an Ohio State fan, if you lived through 2012, like you saw a team go undefeated and then its season was over because of things that 5 players from 2 years ago did, that none of those players were still on the team, and a coach who was no longer with the program covering up for them did. And they were punished for that. And so, no, I mean, you shouldn't necessarily, handle an infractions case in 2015 based on the way you handled it 13 years ago. But optically, it has the appearance of Michigan is getting a lighter punishment than Ohio State did for free tattoos. And, the whole vacating wins thing, like, I get that that's the rule, but it doesn't really make sense to me. Like the idea of like, oh, like, because you didn't have an ineligible player, you can't consider vacating wins as a punishment. I mean, this was something that they confirmed. There was a scheme to get information about opponents with the intent of getting a competitive advantage. They confirmed it happened over more than 2 years, yet they can't punish the team in a way that reflects the fact that some of those wins may have been influenced by this scheme because it didn't involve an ineligible player. And so I think, there's going to be, the fine is significant. We can't deny that the fine is significant. I mean, it could be as much as $35 million that Michigan's going to lose, which would be basically 4 times more than any team has ever been fined by the NCAA before. So that's significant, but is it going to have any tangible impact on Michigan on the field? Because Michigan can still share the maximum allotted amount of revenue with its athletes. And most likely, Michigan's big money boosters are going to pay for most of this fine. And so it's significant in the sense of the fine, but it's just not something that's going to be felt by Michigan fans, by Michigan players, by Michigan coaches, the same way that penalties were, for example, Ohio State 13 years ago.
They were fined 2 Bryce Underwoods, basically.
Essentially, right. Pete Thamel, just to give some specifics to what Dan mentioned, Pete Thamel of ESPN, he tweeted out a couple of hours ago that the total tab for Michigan in this case could range of $30 million. The 10% football program budget fine is at least $7.2 million. Based on a $72 million 2024 football budget. And then the 2-year postseason fine is expected to be at least $20 million. And there's a few other things in there as well that could bump the price tag up. I do find it interesting, though, this comes during a week where Kansas had a donor give $300 million to the Kansas athletic department. So to your point, Dan, when I think about, okay, Michigan's getting dealt with these fines, what's stopping a wealthy donor from saying, I'll come in and I'll give this money that's going to the athletic department, but it's buoying the athletic department from all the losses that they've been given. I'm sure there's probably some bylaws that are written within the NCAA code that say you can't specifically do that. But we also read within the NCAA's ruling on Michigan that some of the rules that Michigan broke are reason for postseason ban. And then they say, however, actually, we can't impact a future team because of the decisions that former teams made. So it kind of seems like there's workarounds to all these rules. I don't know if that's the right way of thinking, but my mind immediately goes to, Kansas just had a $300 million donor. Michigan's losing 10% of that, 30% or $30 million from just this action. What's stopping somebody from just saying, I'll cover that cost? And then what's also stopping another program from making those same decisions that Michigan has made to get a competitive advantage and then having a donor just cut the costs or cut the check for covering whatever fines they may receive?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I think, part of why this doesn't feel like a super substantial punishment for Michigan is that everything in here is things that they can work around. Like there's nothing in here that fully impacts their ability to win this year or in any future seasons, nor does it take any past accomplishments away from Michigan. I mean, even, the recruiting stuff that they have, there's a prohibition on recruiting communications for 14 weeks. I think they've already served that, a percentage reduction in football official visits. But, that stuff, especially in today's economy where NIL is the driving factor in so many recruitments, that stuff isn't going to make that big of an impact in terms of Michigan's roster building for the next several years. And so, it just feels like all of this stuff, especially when you look at the show cause penalties, other than Sherrone Moore serving a whopping 3-game suspension over 2 years in games that have been carefully selected to lessen the impact, all of these show cause penalties are for people who are no longer affiliated with the Michigan football program and will likely never be associated with the Michigan football program again. So it's all stuff that Michigan can kind of work its way around rather than stuff that directly impacts them right now.
Yeah, it's a non-punishment. The thing that prevents Michigan from championship level football is Michigan. It wasn't operating at that level until 2021. They were 2-4 in 2020, and they were 8-5 last year, and they had 6 wins entering the Ohio State game. It's not like, they're going to go. I think take some caution. Like they're going to immediately go back to what they were like during those 3 years. That's a bit of a stretch, man. You'd have to wait to see it. But to your point, Dan, that there's nothing that impairs their ability to achieve what their maximum power would be. I did want to comment on Tadgate because I've seen that a lot from Ohio State fans, and I had a capital J journalism hat on for that scandal. 11 Warriors. I don't think they would have gotten a postseason ban if not for Terrell Pryor after Tressel left, having to justify that he'd be eligible for the supplemental draft. And he did so by saying, I'm ineligible because I took improper benefits. And he pointed investigators toward DeVere Posey, towards himself. And that second notice of allegations in the summertime of 2011 created the repeat offender environment, which back then, in December, they got the one season postseason ban. If it had just ended with Tressel's resignation, I think they just would have taken on what the 9 scholarships that they lost. So, I mean, it's apples and oranges. Different. It's a different era. I mean, the things that were against the law 10 years ago, and the law being NCAA, it's not really, it's fake law, are different now. So things have changed dramatically. You're just giving yourself mental anguish if you're an Ohio State fan. Be like, what about Tatgate? Like, first of all, then, like I just said, there were multiple things about Tatgate. It wasn't just like improper tattoos. It was telling the NCAA that there was nothing to see here, which Michigan just did several times during their investigation. But it's different now. One thing I think about is if you are a fan of a program that's been punished recently, if you're USC or Tennessee or whomever, you're like, all right, I get it. And those are programs with money. I think about like Texas A&M, Texas Tech. They have not put a price tag on the ability to be great. So why would you, Jim Harbaugh said right before this all began that they were going to beat Ohio State or die trying. And they did one of those things. They probably could have gotten some significant punishment, but we now know what the rules are. The rules are if you can buy your way out of something that's in the rule book, good for you. If you can't, then you're probably going to take a penalty that you don't want. And with that said, God help Central Michigan with whatever's coming their way.
And it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the college landscape, I haven't really seen anybody really speaking out about it yet, but how does the rest of the college landscape react to this? And does this increase the push for a separate enforcement arm from the NCAA to try to stop things like this in the future? Because like you said, if this is, all it's going to be going forward for schools that commit violations, then, you look at like what a Texas Tech is doing right now. Like what's going to stop them from just flaunting the rules with, all the bags that they're dropping right now for recruits? Like what is going to stop teams like that from?
They will do that, but it doesn't guarantee success. Because if,
No,
Texas A&M, they bought with the 2023 recruiting class and they sucked.
Yeah.
You still have to do the football part, which Michigan did, but that's where they cheated. And those guys are no longer there. So good for them if they can achieve that success without the, everything they just did with new coaches, with new players that are college aged. That's where we're back to. So you get to see if that was truly a blip, those 3 years, or if it changed the floor for how that program operates. Because they were basically Wisconsin-ish from post Rich Rod until post COVID.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, cheating certainly does not guarantee anything in terms of what you accomplish. So I mean, I've said it all along, like, Michigan still deserves credit for what it did to go out there, win a national championship, to turn around the course of its program. It still deserves credit for what it did. But for me, when I hear, insufficient evidence that it impacted the outcome of games, I mean, you think back to what was it, the 22 game where, we've heard the stories about they knew what plays Ohio State was going to run there. Everybody's pointing up on the sideline. I mean, to think that it had no impact whatsoever. I mean, that seems unlikely to me. I mean, yeah, you can't pinpoint any one game necessarily and say they won that game because of the intel they had from Connor Stallions. And if they didn't have that intel, they might not have, if they would have lost that game. Like, you can't say that outright. And that's kind of what the NCAA is standing behind in terms of, we didn't want to vacate wins. But, the idea to me, I mean, the whole tattoo gate thing, I mean, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but it's like, to me, when I look at them side by side, it's like the NCAA basically, like, by what it said about the vacating wins, is basically saying we still view the crime of giving a player money or benefits that they're not supposed to have as being worse than trying to gain an ill-gotten advantage over your opponent.
Yeah, we lost our minds that summer. The Ohio State tattoo thing was being reported in the same story with what was happening with Jerry Sandusky in Penn State. So you had decades of serial child rape being covered up by university executives, and what happened at Ohio State with tattoos being trading little trinkets for discounted ink. Those were associated as, this is the moral compass for college sports. We're in a different spot now, but to your point, Dan, the NCAA can't quit its amateurism aromas. And so that probably takes a generation, even though you've got, guys that are making multiple comma incomes above board playing college sports. You have to have a good team to win. You have to have good coaching. If you're going to cheat, you have to be good at it. And you were referencing the 22 game on the first drive of the game when Michigan knew what Ohio State was calling, and they scored on that drive. They weren't good enough to stop it, even though they knew what was coming. I think about the pictures of Stalions in that game. He's holding freaking yellow pages of play calling sheets,
massive binder,
which he brought to the game. That's not enough to cheat successfully. You have to have that sort of wiring that he has to immediately go and reference. If you gave me like a manual for how to operate a bomber jet, that's not going to help me fly it. I have to know how to do it. That you have to have the right guy, like a savant for cheating, in order to do what they did. And that's why he was never far from the head coach, the defensive coordinator, or the offensive coordinator. And if that doesn't reach the burden of proof for like, did it help them? I mean, don't hurt yourself trying to argue it. It's done. The solace you take if you're an Ohio State fan or someone who just doesn't like Michigan, they're like a 9-3 program without that. And they weren't even a 9-3 program this year. They have a great freshman quarterback. I've been hearing about them since I was a little kid. You're taught to fear Demetrius Brown, Elvis Gerback, the guy that just got a show cause who was on the staff, Tate Forcier. Like you go through the years, and there's always some guy that's it's unfair now. That's not new. Can you be a 9-3 program without Connor Stalions, or better than a 9-3 program without Connor Stalions and a systematic cheating scheme helping you? We get to find out, and that's exciting because college football is the best sport ever, and it's just one more storyline for this year.
One of the interesting things, Ramsey, you said a couple of words that brought to mind, whether it was, nothing to see here or the burden of proof. One of the funniest things I think that came out of our press conference with the NCAA committee, the infractions committee, was essentially their explanation in part for the penalties that Michigan received was that they had overwhelming evidence that Michigan cheated, but not enough evidence to determine who exactly was involved in the scheme. And one of the things that was mentioned was that they tried to get emails, texts, phone calls from Jim Harbaugh, but he refused. I don't know exactly how far they were allowed to go in that process. I don't exactly know what Harbaugh was obligated to give. The other part of this, and this is the far more hilarious thing, is that Connor Stalions, the NCAA found that he threw his phone into a pond along with a hard drive. It was like he had a murder weapon and he threw it into the river. And so the NCAA wasn't able, to my knowledge and to the knowledge of anyone that read the press release, they weren't able to obtain whatever was on that phone and that hard drive for what he knew, and potentially who else knew what Connor Stalions had recorded over the years in terms of his advanced scouting. And that's a part of this investigation that when you look at how long it lasted, for 2 years for them to get to this point and to still have a sliver of inconclusivity. Is that a word? That seems like a long word that may or may not be real. That it would end inconclusive is wild to me, that they could still now be looking back on the past 2 years of their investigations and say, you know what, we couldn't get it done because Jim Harbaugh wouldn't hand over his emails and Connor Stalions threw his phone in a river. I don't know how much more they could have done, but it feels like they could have done more. Am I crazy in thinking that?
No. I mean, you could go to 2020. Well, 2020 is not a good example because of what 2020 was, but 2016, 17, 18, 19, is there a low-level staffer attached to the hip of both play callers whenever Michigan is on defense or offense and the head coach? And then compare that to 21, 22, and then until October of 23. That would be circumstantial, but like what sort of burden of proof standard are you applying to it? They were never going to get punished the way that I think most diehards wanted them to be punished. It was always going to be a fine. Michigan has unlimited money. This is exactly what they would want. They don't want the future impaired, and the past is still sort of preserved. I think vacated stuff doesn't really matter. We all watch the games. Same thing with the 2010 season. Like that existed. I was at most of those games. They don't exist in the NCAA's mind. I don't give a shit what the NCAA thinks, and I don't think Michigan fans do either. So, this is going to leave people unsatisfied. Like the thing is that reality exists within your head. If you think Michigan's victories were ill-gotten, then you're right. And if you're a Michigan fan and you're like, nothing can take this away from me, you're right. You don't need like the validation of a toothless governing body to make you more right about how you feel. I felt pretty strongly, and then I watched Ohio State boot the 2024 game, and I thought, you don't even need. You could have had Connor Stallions calling plays for Ohio State that day. That's what it felt like, and so that's all I care about. Like you lost to them when you had every reason to hang 100. You hung 10. That kind of redirected me. I'm glad about the 4-game heater they won on afterwards, and different pod, but like maybe that's not possible without what happened against Michigan. But like if you were, I think some fans, including myself, were looking for like, you can't have Michigan in hell for 20 years and then suddenly not be able to beat them. It had to be cheating. I think it contributed to it. Those teams were also really good that Ohio State played, but last year's Michigan team wasn't good. And last year's Ohio State team was national title good. And that was, I'm 51. That was the worst coaching performance I've ever seen in my life from an Ohio State team. It had nothing to do with cheating.
Yeah, and I agree with that. But I think it's too simple when people just say, "Well, the only reason Michigan won those games was because of cheating."
It's overly simplistic.
It was possibly a factor in those first 3 games, but at the end of the day, like you can't just chalk it up just to that and say that's why we lost. Like you still got to go up there and win the game. And
CJ Stroud threw for like 400 yards in a snowstorm in Ann Arbor,
right?
And they lost because the defense was terrible, but also nothing that they did was deceptive. Then he's Heisman favorite in 22, sorry, 21, 22 Heisman favorite. They do nothing in the second half. And you're thinking, oh, they had all the play calls. Ohio State didn't score in the second half last year either. At some point, investigate what Ohio State's doing in the second halves of Michigan games post-COVID.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of it last year is like it's a mental block, and now the question is, now that Ohio State's won a national championship, now that Ryan Day has that pressure off his back from winning a national championship, is that what he needs, this team needs, to really open things up this year, to go into Ann Arbor this year and just play with their hair on fire, because I think last year was a clear example of going into a game and trying not to lose. It was all about, they were so afraid of losing that they ended up losing, because it was just, as soon as things didn't go the way they were supposed to go, it all just kind of snowballed from there.
He tried to beat Jim Harbaugh, or prove Jim Harbaugh wrong, in 2021 again last year. We are a tough team. We can run between the tackles. They're not going to win the 2021 game. It's never going to be vacated, and he's never going to get to play Jim Harbaugh again in college, unless Harbaugh returns after his show cause when he's 74 to coach UNC after Bill Belichick retires. It's not. You have to beat them in 2025, and the 2024 team should have planned to beat the 2024 dog shit Michigan team, which they did not. And if he continues to try to beat the 2021 team, unless he's got a team designed to do that, then I'm starting to veer off here. Ohio State is designed to win national titles. That Michigan team was designed to beat Ohio State. It was two different kinds of strength. And it seems like he just lost the plot. Not in 21, but in 22 and again in 24. So assuming Michigan's not going to do anything they can or die trying or continue down the path of, hey, we just pay for our future transgressions. I don't know if they're ballsy enough to do that, but I also don't think that they can get back to the heights that they were at during that 3-year stretch. And we'll find out this year. The second year last year wasn't a trend. It's just the beginning of the post trend. We'll see what happens the second year post Stallions.
We do have some Ohio State fans and Michigan fans going back and forth in our YouTube comment section right now. Ramsey, I thought a point that you made earlier was interesting regarding, you can essentially look at this and shape it to fit your narrative however you choose. There will
Yeah.
be Ohio State fans who will look at this ruling, and it seems clearly that the NCAA has said that Michigan cheated, right? But to what effect did it have on some of their accomplishments, like winning that national championship in 2023 and some other things? Um, but you can kind of look at it as an Ohio State fan. Okay, they cheated. Maybe they didn't get the penalties that they deserve. Maybe the punishment didn't fit the crime. But if you're a Michigan fan, you still have exactly what you wanted. You have the national championship, you have the undefeated season. And I think that that kind of leaves a little bit of both fan bases feeling less than whole about what has occurred over the past few years, because it does still loom over those seasons that there was, illegal activity, that there was cheating, that there was results that are undetermined whether or not the cheating really impacted them. But you can also shape the narrative that if you're an Ohio State fan, you know that they cheated. Again, the punishments might not be what you want them to be, but there is acknowledgement that that stuff was happening. But then if you're a Michigan fan, you can say, okay, yep, that happened, but we also won a national championship, and they're not taking that away. Neither are they taking away the
You can
wins.
replace all that. Just call
Mhm.
that dirt. And when your team wins something, you want it to be clean, right? So I think I was at the 2002 BCS title game. What do you hear about that game? You hear about Ohio State winning, 14-point underdog, Maurice Claret's strip of Sean Taylor. And you hear about the fourth down play in the end of the first overtime, near the end of the first overtime. It's pass interference. That's dirt. You want to have a clean title. And for many years, you heard like, oh, it's only because of that one play. I'm like, I was at the game. There were numerous times that that could have gone Ohio State's way that did not go Ohio State's way. You're taking it down to that one play, which, I mean, I was on the field. It was pass interference, defensive holding, better characterized. But like, I want it to be cleaner than it was, and that's what I think. You come to 2023, that national title. Michigan fans will tell you publicly, it's totally legitimate. It's were they 15-0? Like it's the best national title ever. And when you throw dirt at it, like you cheated your way there. They wish that wasn't the case, but like you want to have a clean title, whether it's a play call or a penalty or cheating. That's what that's what sports really is. So they're trying to diminish the Ohio State national title. Yeah, I would have loved to see them beat Oregon twice. They would have had to play the same number of games because they would have gone to Indy. They're trying to make it unclean by losing to Michigan. They've got a good point. Losing to Michigan sucks. They still won the Natty. It creates new questions like, would you take unclean natties if it meant losing to Michigan every year? Like, I'm not prepared to answer that question right now. But that's just fandom. So if it's funny, we go between being like NCAA armchair investigators and what should happen, fake lawyers, which is what pretty much anyone who talks about sports on the internet is, whether they're an actual lawyer or not, and then fans who are just trying to blend the two and legitimize or delegitimize how someone feels. That's why you're the boss of you. I really enjoyed Ohio State's national title. I can't believe I've been alive for 3 after growing up and being like, they're never going to win one. I hate that I've seen 1.5 Michigan titles. Is the 2023 title legit? I just hope that they can never get it to feel fully clean. And I think after today, despite what the penalties were, doesn't really seem all that clean, right? Most national titles don't have all these, add up the years, 30 years of show causes attached to it and all the fines. Like, yeah, okay. Congrats on the Natty. Look at all the paperwork it produced.
Yeah, I mean, and I still haven't had a chance to read the full report, but just having skimmed over it, I mean, there's certainly a lot of evidence in there of things that Connor Stallions and Michigan did during that time. So, certainly today's resolution is not an absolution of what Michigan and Connor Stallions did during those years. And I think, it speaks back to your point, like, why do Ohio State fans, like, why did they want those vacated wins so much? Because that's what it is. It's like, you want to be able to have some tangible point that says this national title was not as good as our national title that we just won. And now you do have this, but Michigan fans are going to, if you're a Michigan fan, today's a huge victory because you came out of it saying, we told you all along, we won it legitimately. We were never gonna get it stripped away from us. And now you feel like, that's all in the past. We won. It's a 15-0 national championship. And, but a $35 million fine is not going to change that in anyone's mind. In today's day and age in college sports, I mean, money is without a doubt the biggest driving factor. So you can't write off a $35 million fine as insignificant.
What was the last poor program to win a title of significance? I can't even think of it.
I can't think of one either. And it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. I mean, it's especially now in the revenue sharing era. The teams that have the biggest checkbooks are probably going to be the ones of the best teams every year.
UCF won a national championship in 2017, I think. Oh,
that's right.
Don't forget
Scott
about
Frost and Eddie.
That's right.
Can we pause though? Like, Stalions gets implicated pretty severely in the parts of the report that I read. Throwing a hard drive and a phone into a pond.
Crazy.
He can just wipe it or set it on fire or in a pond. That's what the mafia does. They drop stuff, they attach it to a weight and they put it in a body of water so it doesn't get found. That's phenomenal.
What's the cloud for too? Like, is the cloud not backing up his data? Was he that clear where he wasn't backing up any of this stuff to where it could be traced back to him? That's another thing I've been wondering too, is, the idea of me throwing my phone into a river, I think I would just go get a new iPhone and I could back up my iPhone to the latest update and I'd have all my information back. I was wondering what exactly that would mean if you threw your phone and they still couldn't retrieve any data, how exactly he was cataloging that kind of stuff. That is easily one of the things as you read through it, Dan. I know you said you skimmed over parts of it. That is one of the things in a long press release. Just that moment. What do we make, I guess, of and I guess look at this report coming out. Fans obviously have Ohio State fans. Think, like, how does college football, how do fans, schools, other programs, there's something we can take away when we look at Connor's way, or has his legacy immortalized within the structure of Michigan rivalry, but then Michigan championship and its success years?
He's lionized by Michigan fans, rightfully. I mean, would you trade that guy getting an 8-year show cause, 10-year show, whatever it was? 8
years
for that. Yes, absolutely. You also changed the trajectory of the Ohio State rivalry through that guy. I mean, in part, not wholesale, right? We just talked about that. I think opposing fans or any other fan would be like, why can't we find a guy like that that's less, I don't know. Can you get the whole Connor? Can you just get the espionage parts of Connor Stalions without the crazy ego type that goes on Netflix and the internet and tells on himself constantly? Can you just get that talent without the rest of it? Or is it I think it's one package. That type of person is just, he wrote a manifesto, right? Michigan's got a few people who've done that through history. I think that if you're a team if your team has money, you're like, why can't we do that? Why shouldn't we do that? And can we do it maybe a little bit cleaner so that we can feel better about it once it's done? And I imagine Michigan's not going to go away. They're going to, like, how do we get that magic back? But without having to go through it was almost two years of having that cloud over their heads.
Part of it, Ramsey, I think, is he was on the Bussin' with the Boys podcast, I think last year at this point.
Yeah,
and he was advocating, or I guess he was claiming, that every program in college football has a Connor Stalions. He's just the best of the Connor Stalions. He was saying Ohio State has one, Nebraska has one, Michigan State has one. They all have guys who are trying to study the opponent's signals and are trying to get.
They all have guys that spent $35,000 of unreimbursed money scouting 56 games of 13 future opponents. No, they don't.
That's where the disconnect is.
Everyone does it. Is the biggest cop out in sports, in politics, and there are varying degrees of everything. There's varying degrees of gamesmanship.
I'm glad you brought up that $35,000 number. This is the number that Connor Stalions was funded, because that was another thing that came out of the press conference today that Dan and I were on, was the infractions committee was asked that in the press release, they say that Connor Stalions was funded by an unknown entity, essentially, that they weren't able to exactly
But the
locate
Uncle
who
T
was
guy
funding
that gets
the
talked
Uncle
about.
T. The
Yeah.
Uncle T guy. There was, I believe his name's Tim Smith. Dan might have to clarify that for me, but he was cleared of any wrongdoing within this case. So it didn't end up being that guy that some people had speculated. But the NCAA was able to find that Connor Stalions was being funded by someone to complete this scheme.
It's the bottom of the pond.
It's at the bottom of the pond.
The receipts are in they're in his notes file. He scanned them.
Stalions claimed that he was not reimbursed by Michigan for any of the tickets that he purchased for the Big Ten games, none of the travel. There was nothing that Michigan gave him any money for.
But that report was basically like they never stopped lying throughout. Like this whole thing has been like they lied and lied and lied, and so like, but he said he didn't get reimbursed. Like probably a lie. Like what guy that has his income is spending that much money sending other people to football games?
Yeah. And it goes so much deeper than what we could ever know because of the lack of clarity, given Harbaugh not being able to share or not choosing to share the information from his emails, his texts, his phone calls, and Stalions choosing to do the same. There could have been more people that Michigan chose to send forward to kind of say, hey, like, them that this is what Stalions released. The NCAA several Stalions but a few, and it really what's not makes that's disappointing when it comes just penalty received.
It does. National title never happened. It's lost games. Santa the 30 days, and then it doesn't have part of happening now. How bad it by what's the rules are. I think interesting to see teams getting their value now that it's just a reason to win. Resource elude by whatever sort of government commissioner thing with enforcement. Nah, attorney. I can't. It's we all as cover cheer for a team that unlimited is it's a programs. You're I pro these teams. Olsen by Oster. I just to give
I think